welcome back from lunch. We have a real treat here. Josh Eckels has come up from San Diego to talk to us about Panorama, which is the repository database website for Skyline users who are creating data with Skyline. They're working with Josh for, I think, 15 years now, or is it more? It's even more than that, like 20 years. And it's been a real treat. And so he's got a team over at a company called LabKey that is building on top of a server, and we're working closely with Vagisha, who started Panorama as a module on LabKey, and he's going to tell you more about it. But fantastic to have him here, and fantastic to have him involved.
Yeah, so everyone, I'm Josh Eckels from LabKey. I know it's kind of the post-lunch sleepy, so feel free to jump in with questions or interrupt me or anything to mix it up. So I guess quick show of hands, who here has heard of Panorama before 2 minutes ago? Okay, so about half the people. And also quick show of hands, how many have actually, say, got a project on Panorama Web already? Just one. All right, good for you. And that, good. The kind of quick overview. So Panorama is a server-based complement to Skyline. So we call it a data repository. I know that kind of sounds, what's that? But think of it as a place to kind of put your Skyline documents. So really a lot of the initial impetus for Panorama came from groups that have been using Skyline for a while, generating a lot of data, a lot of files, and all of a sudden, oh, what do? I've got 600 Skyline files on my machine that I've emailed 8 copies to different people. We've got this other file share. I can't keep track of any versions. Oh, the postdoc left the lab. What happened to their laptop? All their data's gone. So trying to solve some of those problems, get it in a centralized place where it can be organized and shared, be able to mine that data, so be able to query and say, hey, where else have I seen this peptide across all of my different Skyline files? And it's been a great real joint effort, like Brendan said, with LabKey as the kind of curators of the overall platform that it's built on, and then the McCoss Lab and Vagisha in particular, but others as well. So we're really co-developing this with input from the community and from users, just like they've done on Skyline itself. Talk more about this kind of in some of the suggested follow-up steps. But you can install this server like in your lab or organization, or the easier path is to use and install it in the McCoss Lab is generously hosting for the community. Just get a project there and be able to upload data. So quick overview of the thing it's built on, because some of these capabilities are key for making Panorama useful. So the overall kind of biological data management system is called LabKey Server. It got its start in proteomics, but it was actually on protein database search, kind of X-tandem sequence mascot style use. And then we expanded to other assay types. You can import other things like sample metadata and things like that and start connecting that with your assay data. And then some of the other things that make it interesting and compelling and kind of help give some context around the data that you're uploading are some of these other features like wikis or file shares, things like that. So if you do, say, a lab presentation and you've got a PowerPoint or a PDF, you can drop that in there too and have that kind of in the same repository as your primary data itself. It's been around for a while, more than 10 years at this point, by a fair bit. And Panorama is the targeted mass spec module, and really it's designed around Skyline. So some folks have said, oh, I've got other types of mass spec tools that I'm using, other targeted tools. We say, yeah, you want to use Skyline anyway, but we're pretty focused on that. So really what we're trying to do is kind of create this iterative process with a variety of different ways to get data in and ways to get data out. So the part that everyone here is at least fairly familiar with, given yesterday and earlier today, you got Skyline. You're talking to your mass spec, you get your raw files, You set up your method, set up your Skyline document, and then direct from Skyline, you can go ahead and import that into Panorama. So that's one thing that's been great about the collaboration is being able to really have these things connected as opposed to, oh, well, you can get that to talk to the other thing, but you have to do this other scripts and all this other nonsense. Trying to make it kind of as correct as we can to make it easier and kind of set up that feedback loop. So then once it's in Panorama, you can look at it through a web browser. So this is really convenient if you're trying to share data with people maybe who don't have Skyline, don't want to install it, maybe they're not actually going to be editing Skyline documents or working on it with that level. You can go ahead and share out a link to a collaborator or make it publicly available. So there's Panorama Public that I think Rajesh is going to mention, which is a way to post data to support a publication. And that has been a great way for people to kind of experimentally work with their data, build up their publication, and then just kind of usher that out without a lot of extra steps. We totally understand and expect that Panorama is not going to do everything you might ever want to do with this big data repository. So just like Skyline has external tools that you can plug in and add capabilities to, Panorama has similar capabilities where you can give the server an R script and it can run R over your data either on the server or be able to pull that out and connect from R running on your desktop, for example. Or you can do more just straight exports of that to Excel or TSV or other file formats like that. And then what we also want to do is be able to get that data back into Skyline so that you can, say, grab a Skyline file, use Panorama as the place to store that instead of just a file share or email, and be able to open that back up, iterate on it, maybe push it back to Panorama with the new version as you curate and build that method. And then we've got this other side path here that we'll talk about later, and I think Lindsay is going to present about specifically for automating QC of instrumentation. So this is a pretty cool capability where you can go ahead and set up this tool called AutoQC. So it runs and monitors a spot on the typically on the mass spec computer itself on the instrument. Monitor for newly acquired QC files to show up, then automatically analyze them using Skyline, but without showing the user interface, and then upload it at the end into what we call a QC folder in Panorama. And basically within a minute or two of having your QC sample finish acquisition on the instrument, you've got information about what your outliers are, various metrics. We'll talk more about that later. But there's a variety of ways, either as you're just working with your data in Skyline through the interface, or automated to get your data into Panorama. So there are kind of three different what we call folder types in Panorama. So Panorama is kind of organized into folders, just like say your desktop computer might be, where you group related types of data. So we've got these three different kind of styles of usage, and so we've customized the interface to try and help streamline that workflow. So the first and kind of where we started out is called experimental data, and this is just kind of a spot to drop files. Typically it might be for a given project, a given experiment. It usually has some sort of thematic connection with each other, but it's really kind of this drop point for them where you can look at different versions of those files. You can search across them, but it's kind of more similar to having the Skyline interface where you're looking at a file at a time, or then you're searching across all of them at once. So quality control, this is the one that I just mentioned related to AutoQC. This is really around QC of the instrumentation itself, whether that's the mass spec or the column or anything upstream in that process. We can go ahead and monitor a variety of different metrics to make sure that things are performing as they should, or do you need to intervene and figure out what's gone off the rails? Oh, my retention time has totally shifted, something's wrong. And then the third is something that we developed pretty early on, didn't get a lot of traction, but then it seems to be getting some renewed interest at this point. So it's what we call chromatogram libraries. So think of this as kind of the analog of spectral libraries, if you're familiar with those, in the targeted world. So what we do is, in a given folder, we're curating this set of targeted mass spec data that we think is basically the most representative version of how that precursor, transition, et cetera, behave in the instrument. And then we can use that to inform future experiments. We can push that back into Skyline, which can import that. And then you can both see, okay, what does this precursor look like, as well as score future runs using that library. So kind of a variety of different kind of workflows that are customized for these different purposes. So going a little bit deeper into each individual one. So the experimental data folders. So this is a great place to drop your files. There are many views that are directly taken from Skyline. So you can see chromatogram views. You can see various views across your different replicates. I think this is a peak area view, but there's a handful of others. Then you can also view something that's pretty similar to kind of the tree exploration on the left-hand side in Skyline, where you're drilling into a given protein or peptide and so forth. We do have full support for Skyline small molecule capabilities. I don't know if that's been discussed yet on the course, but that's something that the Skyline added a couple of years ago, and then we played a little bit of catch-up on the Panorama side to make sure that all that data that Skyline is generating, we're able to import and then expose and mine down the road. Like I said, you can search by protein and peptide, and I'll flip kind of the second half to do a little hands-on, and there'll be more sessions with this so you can see what it looks like in the web browser itself. And then this is a nice capability that we added a while ago to be able to keep track of all the different versions of a given Skyline file that you've generated. So one of the initial scenarios that we helped design this for was around doing a method build. So you're trying to build up your assay before you actually run it on all of your samples. And you may start out with a large number of peptides or precursors that you're considering to include in that method, but then you refine it down, and you may want to capture those different steps along the way. So you don't just have, say, a bunch of files with V1, V2, V3 on them. So in Panorama, it'll actually link those together automatically and let you see version 1 and version 2. And then we're looking to add some additional capabilities to help compare those different versions side by side, so you can see, okay, what actually changed between 3 and 4, or 3 and 10, as you curated and developed that. The quality control folders. So we let you look at a variety of different metrics. Again, show this in a demo, but we've got a number of different types of plots. Who here is familiar with SPROCOP? This kind of external tool. Anybody? So this was a great tool developed by Michael Berriman initially, and it really comes from this statistical process control background. So kind of manufacturing and looking at tolerances and problems. And so what we have here in this plot, for example, is called a Levi-Jennings plot. So we're looking at a given metric, this is retention time, and we are looking at a given peptide, which is part of my QC sample. So typically, we've kind of geared this around running, say, 10 to 20 or so QC peptides that you're really monitoring. You know that they're stable. You know that they're well characterized. You've got a kit. This might be an IRT kit or some other source of that kind of stable peptide library. And then what we have on the x-axis is time. So I think this is 50 or so runs of the QC, and you can see very quickly, okay, something went significantly different on that third sample, and then something shifted. We're maybe halfway through kind of our QC samples, and so this gives us a way to kind of dive back and look and figure out, okay, when did things go off the rails? And then also identify, okay, I need to intervene now, because if my QC sample is behaving poorly, odds are my experimental samples are as well. And then chromatogram library folders. So like I said, kind of the analog of spectral libraries. So what a lot of the workflow around this is you can upload an initial Skyline document and say, I want to use this as my basis for my library. And then you can either just add to it, so you upload a new Skyline document that has totally different proteins and peptides that it includes, and we'll just kind of glom those together into that library. Or if you upload another Skyline document that has overlap, what we do is we let you kind of curate and merge those together and say, okay, I want this one from there, that one from there, and really build up kind of the best and most representative data that you have for it. And then, like I said, you can push that back into Skyline, so kind of completing that loop on the right-hand side of that data flow diagram, and use that to score and just kind of build out future methods. So getting data into Panorama. So you've all been generating Skyline data now, at least for a little bit. And the easiest way is actually in Skyline itself. I guess maybe at this point I'll go ahead and flip over and do a little demo here. I won't actually push at the moment. Vigisha is going to walk you through that in the next section. But just quick orientation, there's kind of two steps to doing this. There's a one-time setup where basically you tell Skyline what Panorama server you want to talk to, and you give it your credentials to log into that, because anytime you're talking to Panorama, you're doing that as a given user. You might be an anonymous user because that data is publicly accessible and you can download it, you can browse it. But on pretty much any installation, you're not going to be able to upload data without having an account that has permission. And so you can do that within Skyline by going to this push file. Okay. There we go. So, yep. Now, this is new. I didn't know that, or maybe not even new. But so, yeah. Excellent. Well, you learn something every time you come to the course. So it's asking us here, basically, hey, you haven't told me about anything. Where do you want to send this data to? And if we go now the real question is, why hasn't Brendan set up Panorama Web already as a target here? Yeah. All right. Well, I won't give away too much then, but essentially we point it at, and it looks like it is kind of defaulting to Panorama Web, because that's the most frequently used install. But you do need an account to be able to upload that, and Vigisha will kind of show you that. And then the next step is to tell it where in the server, basically what folder you want to push it into. And so it'll connect to the server, figure out what the folder structure looks like, and say, drop it here, and it's got some nice capabilities now. Vigisha added that if you're uploading a new version of that same document, it says, well, last time you uploaded it here, you want me to drop it in the same spot. And then, like I said, it'll link that together, connect it with the previous version. But since we're not quite set up, I won't go through that, and Vigisha will take it from there next time. So we're continuing to evolve Panorama, just like the Skyline team is adding new capabilities and releasing new versions. So we just released, I think about a week and a half ago, our newest version, which is 17.2. And there's a handful of, I think, pretty compelling new things in Panorama. So they aren't yet available on Panorama Web. Vigisha and I were debating, should we upgrade the server right before or right after the course? Decided right after, just to be safe. But the first one, I had a poster at this at ASMS in June, is adding support for Skyline's quantitation via calibration curves. So we'll, before we've kind of caught up on the Panorama side, we wouldn't capture those. But this allows you to do absolute quantitation by having kind of a known calibration curve against which to map the data. That's all set up in Skyline. So I don't think I highlighted this, but Panorama is really kind of a read-only repository for this data. You still continue to edit and modify your Skyline files in Skyline itself, and then push it into Panorama. We didn't want to kind of duplicate that full set of functionality on both sides. But that's why we also made it easy to grab it from Panorama back into Skyline to be able to kind of complete that loop. And then quality control exclusion. So this is a new feature where, let's say you've got one problematic sample in your QC run. It's something that somebody used the wrong QC sample when setting up the run on the instrument. So you may want to go ahead and exclude that to say, yeah, I know something's wrong with this one, but it's okay. I've looked at it, and you can do that either based on just the single sample level, so across all the different metrics, all the different peptides, or you can say for a given sample and a specific metric. So let's say retention time was all messed up for a given sample, but everything else looked good. You can keep all the other metrics that it's tracking, but go ahead and exclude that one, and then that way it doesn't kind of impact what Panorama is calculating to be the number of outliers. And it's also not using that when it figures out that future runs are outliers. Basically, you're just tagging it and saying, nope, something was anomalous. But we keep that data instead of just deleting it so that we have it to reflect back on. Data sharing. So I kind of hinted at some of the different levels of access you might have to Panorama. So you can keep your data private just to you. Only your account can see it. You can make it so that you're the only one who can edit it, but maybe other people in the lab can read it. Or you might have people that you trust to go ahead and upload new Skyline documents. And if other people can get to your server, that is, there's not a firewall between them and the Panorama instance, you can make that data fully public if you want to. So there's no requirement that you do that either on your own installation or on Panorama Web. But it is a great way to, like I said, support a publication or you can otherwise disseminate some of this data in a much richer interface than you would get if you just dropped it on a FTP site or something like that. And then APIs. So, like I said, we've done a lot of work to make sure that you have a number of different ways to connect to your data and query it and leverage it. So R is one of the most popular ways that people are doing that. There's a package in CRAN called R LabKey. In fact, you can just go anytime you're looking at data in Panorama and say, give me the chunk of R code that I need to paste into my script to get exactly the data that I'm looking at. So if anyone is an R developer, that's under the export menu and pretty convenient. And all of the data that we're loading into Panorama goes into a database on the back end. And you can also use that to write your own queries over your data. So if anyone is a SQL developer, you can go ahead and do that within Panorama and not have to, say, load into a totally different system. And we, like I said, are importing the full content of the Skyline document. So instead of just having transitions or something like that you might get from kind of a flat export, you've got that full relational data model behind the scenes. So maybe I'll flip and go to Panorama Web real quick, kind of show what this looks like for just a moment or two to prep for the other presenters. So maybe the easiest way to just kind of start poking around in terms of Panorama is to look at some of the example data that's posted on the server. So these are a variety of different Skyline files that have been imported into this kind of demo folder here in Panorama. We have a list here of the different runs, or basically the different Skyline documents that have been imported. You can see it's a relatively small number here, and they're not, for the most part, particularly huge files. But we can go ahead and click on, let's look at study 7 here. So we get kind of a summary view, a lot like you get in Skyline, kind of down at the bottom, showing some of the counts. We go ahead and explore the data. Go ahead and click through say this peptide of interest and look at the chromatogram, so a lot like the views that you see in Skyline itself. We can go ahead and look at some of these summary charts, so looking across the variety of replicates. So here we've got peak areas on the left and retention times on the right. Ability to interact with some of these and do grouping and filtering based on annotations that you might have attached to those replicates on the Skyline side. And then I'll go ahead and show also one of those QC folders. So this will look a lot like the screenshot in the slide, but here, can everybody see okay? Should I bump up the font a little bit? Steve, look good? Okay. So we've got, 6 or 8 different metrics that are available to look across all these different QC samples. So let's go flip from retention time to peak area. So if I scroll down, I can see all the different peptides that are being monitored as part of my Skyline document here. I can go ahead and overlay all of those on a single plot instead of having them individually. So we get those as a separate series. Have this capability to do what we call annotations. So basically an annotation is just something that you want to mark as having occurred. This might be something where you do that up front because you know, all right, I swapped out the column. Clearly that's going to have some impact on my data. I might see a retention time shift. So you can go ahead and proactively mark that and have it show up in these plots. Or you can also do it kind of retroactively. So, okay, I noticed something was off in my plots. I investigated and figured out that in that particular lot of the QC peptides was bad. So I can go ahead and mark that. So next time, if that happens again, I see a similar trend on the plots. I have some little bit of context to figure out what went off the rails. You can go ahead and download these as PNGs or PDFs. So if you want to grab these, use them in a presentation or support a publication, something like that, that's pretty easy to do. And then we have a variety of different plot types that we added a couple versions ago. And come along, Chrome. There we go. Where we basically identify different types of trends. So if we have kind of increased variability, for example, even though we might be kind of bouncing around in the same overall range for a given metric, we can see on these other plot types that kind of comes out as we have a slow trend. So it's slowly going up or down, but it's still within kind of our normal window overall. That can be highlighted in some of these other plots and flagged as an outlier. So just a variety of different, basically statistical process controls looking at those different types of outliers. And we have some capabilities to kind of show a summary. So have separate QC folders, basically one per instrument in the lab or one per project, and then a dashboard view to look across all of those to see what's the status of each one. Is it instrument A having a lot of outliers while the others are okay? Okay, let's go ahead and focus on that one and get it back under control. So next steps, I suppose the next step is to listen to the next presentation, which will go into more detail, but getting a project on that Panorama web, the server I was just showing a moment ago, is probably the easiest way to start kicking around. And I think everyone has at least a kind of trial account for use here in the course. Like I said, you have control. Is that data private? Is it public? Kind of who can access that? Using Panorama Public, kind of a specific area on Panorama web, specifically to publish data or to share data supporting a publication. And then there's also a program that we set up with the McCost Lab, really targeting groups that want to have their own in-house installation. So usually pharma, where they don't want to have kind of a shared hosted server, where we'll go ahead and joint venture between LabKey and the cost lab to kind of support that installation, both kind of operationally, IT-wise, getting it up and running, and then also making sure that people are making the best use of the software and its capabilities, and then even beyond that, helping us set priorities for what are the next things that we want to be adding to the software. Primarily on the Panorama side, but also kind of very much integrated with Skyline, because Panorama does not stand on its own. All right, that brings me to the end of time slot and slides.